Hey, welcome to the Insider edition of the Upland Nation podcast. Glad you could join me. I'm Scott Linden. We're getting close, well, for many of us at least, close to the beginning of this bird season. Maybe you've been out chasing prairie grouse, forest grouse, doves, who knows? But, the main event is coming right up. And I thought it would be a good time to kind of refresh your memory or jog your memory or give you some new starting points for some of the other public access opportunities we have out there. I've covered a lot of this in bits and pieces over the past few years, but I thought one single comprehensive list put together so that you can just check the items that you want to explore might be of interest to you. It's all made possible by CableGangz, Stakeout Systems, and Heartland Lodge. Can't wait to get back there. As well as Mid-Valley Clays and Shooting School, Trulock Choke Tubes, Purina Pro Plan Sport Dog Food, Sage and Breaker Gun Care Products, Pointer Shotguns, and High Vis Sights. Yeah, I thought I'd do this by telling a little story as well. So bear with me as I relate some of my hunting stories that have taken place in less than the usual, other than the usual suspects when it comes to public access. And the starting point for this one was a long time ago, but it was one of those places where, hey, if it worked, wow, it would be great. It's a lot closer than all those other places I have to go. A friend of mine, and I wasn't sure if he was yanking my chain or not, but what the heck. I had had the weekend free, and I had a dog that needed a lot of exercise, so we headed for a place that, you'll get it. We're walking around on pretty nice ground. An old homestead here, an orchard there, irrigation ditches here and there. Lots of very small prairie-like patches and some hedgerows and a few trees here and there. And I was walking through the orchard when, yeah, that's right, a pheasant got up. I missed. Dog got excited. And all of a sudden my view of my friend changed from practical joker to fine and dandy good guy. A pheasant on a waterfowl refuge. I know that may not surprise some of you, but at the time it sure surprised me, and it might surprise a few of you as well. But if you take a look at that, and I've since taken a look at a lot of that, there are a lot of refuges, state and federal, that were set aside for another species. And I'll get into some of those down later in the story here. But they were, in large part waterfowl refuges, but many other game species, or non-game species for that matter, that contain plenty of ideal upland game bird habitat. It comes with the territory sometimes. For example, one place I visit, they like to make it amenable to sandhill cranes. So they've got lots of managed agriculture. Some of that agriculture means feed for pheasants or valley quail in this case. Starting with wildlife refuges as a first step, don't discount them, and if you can, learn more about the ones that might be on your route or in your current neighborhood that might serve as at least a place to explore. Whether it's for your bucket list trip or just part of a weekend, you got to start in the right place, but if you don't know where the right place is, then you'll probably look like one of those husbands holding all the bags on Rodeo Drive. So I'm going to give you a little bit of advice on where to go, and then maybe a little bit of advice on how, if time allows, how to find those places. Because remember the Cheshire Cat in Alice in Wonderland? When she's trying to find her way back, he says something like, well, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. But if you have the knowledge and you know what's available, maybe you could save yourself a little bit of time and trouble and maybe find a new place to hunt. That's the idea. As I said, many of these places are managed by some sort of government agency at one level or another for something else. Waterfowl, big game, but the same habitat or nearby adjacent habitat is perfect for the birds we chase. Quail, sharptails, pheasants, huns, it doesn't matter. And there's a bonus to all this because, as you well know, if you go to the big players, the Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management, they have such vast patches of real estate that they have to handle that they're not doing a lot of active management. In fact, I was on a piece of Forest Service ground just this morning, and the first thing that struck me was there's a white truck. There's somebody from the Forest Service actually out here. And it had been months since I'd seen anybody doing anything out there. So the other agencies who don't have quite as large a real estate inventory to handle do a better job of it in many cases, especially if they're managing for conservation purposes. Bighorn sheep, for example, or waterfowl. There are things you can do with water and crops, grazing, predator control, to benefit the geese or the elk or the ducks or the pronghorns or anything else. The joy is all that stuff is just as welcoming to upland birds and here's the key, to folks like us who pursue upland birds. Yeah, you don't need to wear camo to hunt at a federal or a state wildlife refuge. There are a few rules, and we'll talk about that in this little part called This Land is Your Land. And I called it that for a reason. From South Dakota to Southern California, there are federal and state lands with refuge in the name, and they may have been created for something else, but they allow upland hunting. Now, don't cross them off their list just because it says Bighorn Sheep Refuge or waterfowl. Take a longer look. You'll be ahead of the game if you put those places at least on your shopping list. And remember, we, the people, own those places. And in fact, in recent years, there have been lots of efforts at the federal level to ensure that we have more access for hunting and fishing than we've ever had before. In fact, last movement I saw in that regard was, unless there's a scientific reason not to, most refuges are going to open their gates to you and me. We'll get into some of the rules that you have to follow and some of the more, courtesies you might want to consider. But the fact of the matter is, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or the State Department of Wildlife is managing that ground for the benefit of the species and the owners, you and me. I'm going to tell you a quick story about a bighorn sheep refuge in Nevada that ought to be a national park. Oh, that wasn't my idea, but I agreed with the guy I was soaking with in the hot springs one night when he said, if this was closer to a big city, it would be a national park. I mean, it's got unbelievable lava formations, a chasm that probably harbors orcs in the next edition of a Lord of the Rings movie. Couple little trout streams, plenty of hot springs, even fire opals if you're interested in digging for them. Oh yeah, and bighorn sheep, and wild burros, a few wild horses, and some pronghorns. But if you listen closely, you'll also hear chukars calling from the high spots. And in the level ground, that a valley quail. And boy, have we had a good time over there. So we've got some great routes that we follow when we're on this refuge. They start in the low ground and they go to the top. And we discovered them by accident and at the price of a couple flat tires over the years. But this one also holds a bonus. If you're hunting the right slopes, they're littered with black sparkle, obsidian. In fact, I was trying to figure out what the heck. In most places you'll find a little pile here, a little pile there. Somebody either tossed off all their chips when they were making an arrowhead, or one piece had been crushed over the years. But this was everywhere. I mean, as far as the eye could see. And as I was looking for how far that was, I see Manny, my older wire hair, on point. So I started hightailing over there. He's like 200 yards away. And it's uphill, of course. It always is. And before I can get near him, let alone the covey, they launch, and they all go the opposite way except for one. And he comes right at me. You know that incomer at the sporting clays course? Or if you've ever shot a European hunt? It was just like that. Even I can hit a slow incomer. And I did. Manny got a retrieve. We were happy. I showed the spot to a friend. We go back every year for old time's sake. I don't think we've ever found a bird in that spot since, but it was certainly worth it. And all of this on a bighorn refuge. Now I go back every year because there's so much variety there. There's petroglyphs. The canyons are unbelievable. A sheep sighting every once in a while. We always see the burros. They're kind of cool too. But the bonus on the bonus is another covey flush. And it's not just true there. I talked about that orchard pheasant on a waterfowl refuge. You walk far enough and there's some highlands that have a few valley quail. Because you're shooting non-toxic on a lot of these places, you jump shoot a mallard off the big river that runs through this one. There's a little bit of everything if you explore, if you trust your gut a little bit and keep an open mind. Because sometimes it's not called a refuge, and it's not really conceived as a place where nothing can be done to hassle any of the wildlife. There are a lot of places that are instead administered by the state or the feds through the Fish and Wildlife Service that have a different name. Wildlife Management Area or Wildlife Production Area. So if you're looking for places and you're using a search engine, you might have to get a little bit more open-minded in your search terms. I learned that. What's the opposite of learning something the hard way? I guess the easy way. We were pulling into a town in South Dakota, but before we got all the way into town, everybody had to make a pit stop. So I found a little turnout off the road, and pulled up over a little rise, and there's a little squared off, fenced in parking area. We get up to there's no gate, but there's an opening. So we pull in, and there's a blue sign. Sure enough, it says waterfowl production area. We're not there for any hunting. We're just there to make ourselves comfortable for the next 4 or 5 miles left before we get to town. But I let Flick stretch his legs a bit. We went out beyond the parking area, and son of a gun, if he didn't go on point. The grass, after the fact, I finally figured out the grass on this parcel was, exactly the right length, the biologists tell us, for sharptails, and that's exactly what he pointed. I didn't bring a shotgun. I didn't have the right ammo anyhow. But sure enough, over the years, production areas and management areas have paid off for upland hunters like you and me as much as they have for duck and goose hunters. There's another good reason to look at some of these refuge-like public lands. The people who manage them, they are generally way more hands-on in their approach than the bureaucrats who sometimes get into a truck and drive out onto a national forest or a big piece of BLM land. They've got other goals. Their boots are on the ground all year. And because you're not the 35th guy asking where to find honkers that day, they might be amenable to sharing some starting points for upland birds. First time I went to one over there, if you lean to the right, you can see the hill. You go around that hill in about 150 more miles and you're there. There's a sign-in office for almost all the waterfowl refuges. You got to sign in. I walk into the sign-in office, and there's a guy, I find out later, who runs the whole refuge. Boy, has he been a resource over the years. Thank you, Marty. But even if no one's there, there's a place for you to sign in. It may be a sheet. It might be a card that you take part with you and drop the other part in a box. You can always learn something from some of that, even if you have to kind of lean over and peer through the little slot. You might be able to read some of those cards. And if you run in any of the guys in camo coming in to make their report at the end of the day, they might be of help as well. I had a fun time once. I was swapping lies with that very same waterfowl refuge manager. And a father and son came in, and they were just kind of poking around. And so my friend Marty asked him if he could be of assistance. And they said, we're thinking about learning how to quail hunt, and thought there might be some here. So being the busybody that I am, I said, yeah, there are. In fact, I'm going to go right now. You want to go with me? So I had a couple partners for half a day, and they enjoyed themselves, and Buddy did a good job, and everybody was happy, and maybe we got a couple more quail hunters out of the deal. There's another place I go on a, what is it called? A wildlife area. It's just called somebody's name, wildlife area. Managed for elk. And I've never seen elk. I've never seen elk tracks. I've never seen elk sign, but I see an elk hunter every once in a while. But again, it's managed in some fascinating ways for the elk that must come there. I just never see that. I do see a lot of wild turkeys, so. So we're walking, I've heard there were birds, upland birds. So we're walking a field that was cultivated for elk. I think they grew some sort of a hay crop on it. I couldn't tell the last time. They hadn't done anything with it that year. But we were walking the edges of this cultivated field along an irrigation ditch, and Flick was going up the hill that was on one side and down the hill on the other side, finding quail on both sides, catching them as they moved from the highlands down into the feed and back up. Like I said, I've never met a big game hunter there, and I've never met another bird hunter there, but I've met plenty of birds. Yeah, and if you go all the way to the top, there are chukars there. I don't go there often enough, but I know for a fact because I've shot one or two. Wonderful place, and once again, a refuge-like location managed for something other than upland birds. Well, that's the first half of our insider edition of the Upland Nation podcast. I'm Scott Linden, sharing some of the thoughts I have. And in fact, in the second half, I'll give you a few bits of searching advice, online searching advice, and then a comprehensive list of the kind of places that you might want to go that you maybe hadn't thought about going upland bird hunting. And it's all brought to you by CableGangz, dog tie-out, stakeout, whatever you want to call it, systems. CableGangz, just so that you know, Cable, GANGZ.com. These guys have over-designed the best tie-out stakes and cable system for your dog. Now, I'm a big advocate, number one, of tying out a dog for all sorts of reasons. You can read it in all of the stories I've written over the years. But if you're going to do it, you better have the right tools, because there's nothing worse than having your tie-out stake fail when you need it most. Brendan and his team have used the highest quality, more robust materials, and they have designed and engineered them in a way to ensure that they function even after you beat the heck out of them over and over and over again. If you haven't had a tie-out stake fail on you in one way or another, well, it's only a matter of time, unless you're going to CableGangz.com. They're my tie-out stakes, and they ought to be your tie-out stakes. CableGangz.com. And I can't say enough about this place. We made some television shows there for Wing Shooting USA years ago, and I'm going back to Heartland Lodge. They're in southern Illinois. They are an incredible place. They've added even more great habitat, from crops to CRP to creek bottoms to woodlots, all waiting for you and your dog. It's a top-tier Orvis-endorsed lodge, definitely worthy of your bucket list. Learn more, get on the mailing list, and don't forget, this year I've asked them to do you a big favor. If you make a booking, you're getting a free Heartland Lodge cap and a goodie basket waiting for you in your room. Go to heartlandlodge.com. Welcome back to the Insider edition of the Upland Nation podcast. I'm Scott Linden. I promised you some help with your online search, and then a comprehensive list, and probably a few other practical suggestions in this half. Even a few places to go where I've had a good time that could handle a little bit more traffic. Well, in your online search, you might want to do a few things that, well, nobody does this. You know, I've asked you all in the past in a newsletter survey, how do you find new places to hunt? And I gave, 5 or 6 choices. Online searches ranked way down on the list. And I understand there are possibly more reliable sources or easier to reach sources. Your friends are number 1. Public agencies are number 2. But I like Google. Number 1, I can do it anytime, any place. And number 2, You never know what you're going to find out there. Just fishing with a friend of mine a few days ago, and he remembered something he saw years and years ago. Then he went old school, wrote it down on a scrap of paper, put it in his wallet, and didn't come across it for many, many more years. Well, now we go back to that fishing spot about every third year for the last 15 years. So there are many ways to find new places to hunt that are publicly accessible, starting with your Google search. Like I said, there's very little competition. Yes, you do have to take everything you read with a grain of salt, but consider the source, and some of it is worth a look. Some things that I've used that may be a little bit less common. If you're going to a particular area and there are guides and outfitters in that area, go to their websites. Sometimes they're guiding on public land. You could figure that out, and you're welcome there too. Sometimes you'll find a newspaper story, and deep in that newspaper story is a reference to a place. Obituaries are very helpful in that regard. Old Joe in his prime would always hunt this place for this bird. Well, it might have changed, but it might not have changed. If you're on the state agency website, wildlife agency in this case, obviously, many of them compile harvest statistics, sometimes by county or region or there's a unit, whatever. Take a look at those. I just finished a story for somebody, and it was about a place I go that is the second best when it comes to harvest statistics. Everybody's going to go to the number one spot. Hey, go ahead. I prefer my solitude. I'm going to the redheaded stepchild. Sometimes in bird country, chambers of commerce have information for you. Some are good, some are not good, some are clueless. It doesn't matter, but you may as well exhaust. You can do all this while you're watching a football game. Why not do it? If you're a member of some of the discussion forums or the, Facebook pages, that sort of thing, you never know what might come out of that. And then, gosh dang it, I wish I could remember. You know who you are, and thank you again for this one. If you're looking for more obscure birds in lesser known locations, go to some of the birder websites. Yeah, bird watchers. Yeah. If you're looking for, Hungarian partridge in southeast California, that's the group that's going to find it. Okay, I promised a few real places that you might want to take a look at. And I've been to all of these, and I love them all, and I know that they can handle a few more hunters. Promise me, if you go, you won't kill your limit. You'll limit your kill. You'll be courteous and thoughtful. And if someplace is occupied, you'll go somewhere else on the same area. If you're near Huron, South Dakota, the Magatahapi Wildlife Area, don't ask me to say it again. Head-high grass and ringneck pheasants. Southeast Oregon's got the Malheur National Wildlife Area. Got valley quail, chuckers, and roosters, depending on where you are there. In Nebraska, the Valentine National Wildlife Refuge is in the Sand Hills. Need I say more, sharp-tail hunters? The Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area. I wish I'd known about this when I lived down there. That's in Central California, one of the few public places that still has pheasants. And I just might remind you, in California, quote, state game refuges, unquote, are often on privately owned land. And they're not technically refuges. They are no hunting zones. So be mindful of how they define things down there. Actually, any place you want to go, be mindful of that. Acquaint yourself with the terms and the conditions, as they say. There's a whole bunch of other places out there. The Charles M. Russell National Wildlife Refuge in Montana has Sharpies as well, for example. You can just find a state, search for wildlife areas and refuges. Washington State, for example, has more than 1 million acres of that sort of stuff. But it's not just wildlife refuges. Drum roll, please. Here is what I hope will be the rest of the story when it comes to places to search for public access and decent upland bird hunting. State school lands, they might be called school trust lands, or they might be held by the state's real estate management agency. Whatever they are, most of them are worth a look. Some may be closed to hunting, many are open to hunting. They're on the maps as blue blotches, just like other state-owned land. Private forests. Many privately owned forests have made accommodations for sportsmen and women, timber companies, paper companies, that sort of thing. Many state parks. I was lucky enough to get clued into a place that was going to become a state park, but was currently owned by a conservancy, and I'll talk about them in a minute. Thanks to a friend of a friend, I was able to hunt it before it became a state park, and had a good time. I've mentioned state wildlife management areas and waterfowl production areas. Some are state, some are federal. Anything owned by the Bureau of Land Management on the federal level. Energy agencies like the TVA and the BPA. Many tribal lands are open. Of course, you got to follow their rules and buy their license and that sort of thing. Mining, utility, rights of way. Some military bases. I've still got my eyeball on one in Central California that's worth a look. I was invited by a retired general to look at that one. Many conservation groups have done projects. I'm thinking of one in Montana from Pheasants Forever, for example, but they're all over the place. And number one, if you're a member, you ought to have helped on that. Number two, well, you don't have to be a member, but you ought to have helped on some of those. And number two, you've got a line on them that's a little bit easier to follow. The Nature Conservancy is probably the big dog in that world, but there are conservancies of all sorts that are owning and managing real estate, some of it open to hunting. The Bureau of Reclamation. Yeah, this is a federal agency that keeps a relatively low profile. They're in the water management business. I was going to say flood control, but sometimes they don't do a very good job of that. They also handle some aspects of irrigation management. But the Bureau of Reclamation will often hold parcels that look pretty birdy. I think I might have shared this with you at some point in a magazine article, but we stopped at one spot before we crossed the Missouri River just to stretch our legs. Funny, we have to stretch them a lot. I drink a lot of coffee. Flick does not, but he's glad to go whenever I stop. And we're just walking around. There's a little dam. Not little, it's gigantic now that I think about it. But there's an access point and parking area, and then there's a sort of a park and a boat launch, and lots of sharp-tail habitat. Folds the landscape, little shrubby patches at the bottom of those canyons, shin-high grass, and yes, indeed, every once in a while, a sharp-tailed grouse. Bureau of Reclamation and their sister agency, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Again, handling a lot of water-oriented projects. So if you're passing a reservoir or a dam or a canal or something that's been managed from a topographic standpoint and there's water nearby, the Corps probably has a hand in it. And most of those places are open to hunters. I might also tell you, some of the best camping areas are managed by those same two agencies. Inexpensive, well managed, and right smack dab in great habitat. So if you're looking for more information sources beyond your Google search, of course, you're talking to your friends, you're a member of the organizations, conservation groups, you're doing all the things that I suggested. You're talking to the local agencies. And I don't mean just calling the game bird biologist at the state headquarters. They may or may not be of help. They may actually, no offense if you are one of them, but I've gotten as many wild goose chases from those kind of people as I have productive hunting. So take it with a grain of salt, add it to your list of other data, and then dig deeper. Go to the local level. There's probably a regional office with somebody who actually does drive around in the white pickup truck and count birds or manages habitat. See what they'll tell you. Remember, again, this land is your land and we paid for it. Somebody ought to be able to help us a little bit. Yeah, we also pay their salary. So feel free to expect some level of assistance. You're going to book a lodging arrangement somewhere. Sometimes it's somebody at the front desk. Sometimes that front desk is at the local wildlife agency. One of the best tips I got for a public access piece in, that state over there, came from the guy who answered the phone at their local office. I asked for a biologist. He said, "Oh, he's not here. What do you need?" I said, "Well, blah, 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 pheasant hunting, blah, blah, blah." He says, "Oh, I'm a fanatic." So we got to talking, and that turned out to be very useful. Chambers of Commerce, visitors associations, they're also on my list. They're always worth a try. And if you are a member of a fraternal group, elks, eagles, moose, whatever, maybe your compatriots in the local area are willing to share a little bit of information with you. Ditto for fellow members of your, of NAVDA or of Pheasants Forever, Quail Forever, or Rough Grouse Society. Sometimes, number one, you might get some information. Number two, you might find a new hunting partner. Okay, let's get back to the refuges again, because I'm such a believer in this stuff. There's no limit on the adventure available to you. I'll never forget. I got to tell you this one. We were hunting along, it was really cold. We were along this stream that was not frozen. It was bigger than that. And we were in the desert. So, of course, you're going to be near water. If you hunt valley quail, you know what I mean. You hear this pit, 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 pit. That means they're about ready to go. They're sick and tired of putting up with you getting closer and closer. And then the dog hits the brakes, points, and they're gone. They come up out of this willow thicket, and you could hear them for a good second or two before they clear the willows. Their little tiny wings on those little tiny willow stalks are making way more racket than they should. 24 birds cleared the brush and streaked upstream. I popped a bird. It fell in the water. Flick got the retrieve. We went up a lava rock wall. We went upslope toward it. And son of a gun, if there isn't the world's largest petroglyph. Petroglyphs are the ones that are essentially painted on. Pictographs are the ones that are chipped out. I think that's right. Maybe it's the other way around. Anyway, it looked like a spaceman. From there, that's what it looked like. And you've all seen those. As we got closer and closer, I kept thinking, it's so big. But I could see why some guy would, no, he can't possibly have done that. It was like 14 feet high, and it was about 25 feet from the ground. There was a series of, we call them bushy-tailed wood rats. They live up in that stuff. And when they pee, it turns black. That they'd done that in a coordinated manner, I guess. Another time we came around a corner and there was a stunning natural rock arch, backlit like an art director in a movie's fever dream. And there was one bird under it that fell to Dave's shot after Buster pushed him into the air. I was walking along another ridgeline once, and you know that feeling that you're being watched? Well, I was. A bighorn ewe and lamb had been following me and my dog for a couple 100 yards, I guess. They were just curious, and bighorns are, they're a lot easier to approach than a lot of other wild game. No, it wasn't even on that bighorn refuge. It was somewhere else. All right, so refuges are high on my list, but we got to be good neighbors when we're hunting on a wildlife refuge or anything that resembles one. A few more rules that you might have to follow. You might have to check in and then check out. Fill out a little form. Carry a card with you. Most likely, you'll have to use non-toxic shot. Sometimes shooting hours or season length may be limited out of courtesy for the duck hunters who are there at the crack of dawn, or because some other migratory animal needs to use that place without being bothered. Out of courtesy, stay away from the waterfowl honey holes. Check the refuge website or make a phone call to make sure upland hunting is allowed. In fact, make a phone call anyway. This is how you avoid flooded roads, bridges that have collapsed, places that have been burned or hayed or grazed. Phone calls are the best way to learn that stuff. If it's a big game refuge of one sort or another, again, be mindful of perhaps limited seasons. But all of those parameters are a small price to pay for virtually undiscovered hunting ground. That might hold a covey or two. Be considerate of the refuge's primary goal and learn enough about other users so you won't screw up someone else's hunt or crash into an animal sanctuary plot, feeding area, or managed crops. Make sure you have the right permits. Sometimes you need something else. And study your map carefully. If you're on a waterfowl refuge, of course, you want to make sure that your firearm is appropriately plugged if it needs to be. And, of course, be ready for damp ground. You can still leave your waders at home and get ready to have a great time on a hunt for upland birds where most of the time you'll hear more quacks than cackles. Well, hopefully I'll see you on some of that public access ground in the future. I'm Scott Linden. You're listening to the Insider edition of the Upland Nation podcast. If you enjoy these, please tell somebody about them and leave a rating at Apple Podcasts. And then feel free to tell our sponsors. We're made possible thanks to CableGangz Stakeout Systems and Heartland Lodge. With additional support from Mid-Valley Clays and Shooting School, TrueLock Choke Tubes, Purina Pro Plan Sport, Dog Food, Sage and Breaker Gun Care Products, Pointer Shotguns, and High Viz Sights. Hey, thanks so much for listening. Have a great season. I'll see you on some public access ground.